Welcome everyone, glad you're here. I gave you a sheet of paper that has a map of the area as well as on the other side there's like a little bit of a list of Paul's books and where scholars think he would have written it from and the approximate date there. So just a little bit for your reference if you can't see the map clearly. I'm going to go through a lot of pictures really quickly here just to kind of give you a sense. This is the area we're looking at. This was Alexander the Great in 323 BC. This is the Roman Empire around 117 AD, and this is the area that Paul would have been in. And then you go here, that's something else. Remember to talk about the Roman Empire being the west and the east, and how the west fell in 476, and then the east is known as the Byzantium. All right, and then this was the what they call the Ottoman Turk invasion, the expansion of Islam throughout that area. So what was once all Christian area has now in this area become Muslim. All right. Oh, I forgot that. Oh, bummer. All right. If I say the word to you, Nike, Nike. Okay. So long story short, that was kind of a cool fun fact that we learned is that Nike. So the town that we were at was one of the towns we visited was Thessaloniki. And Nike actually has a meaning of, it's the goddess of victory. And so basically, this is a relief that was in the grounds of Ephesus. And if you can see here, you see the swoosh?
Yeah.
Apparently, the company Nike actually used that as kind of their foundation. So that was kind of my first fun fact. No way! So, all right, there you go. All right, so we're going to look a little bit about the footsteps of St. Paul. I had a great trip. We went on July 15th to July 25th. There were about 7 people that I knew and 22 people altogether. I went with Father Stan, also my friend, and Father Andy Gehring, who was 2 other priests. There was another priest who went, he was from Wisconsin, and you'll see some different things. So what we tried to do is we ultimately followed what we're going to call Paul's second missionary journey. But that was what we're doing. So what I'm going to try to do is show you some pictures, talk a little bit about Paul, and then there's a couple things that we were off course too. So we did something, we visited things in Greece that was not Paul, but still awesome. All right, so in the footsteps of St. Paul. So just a background here. You're familiar with Paul. He's also called Saul, and he was born in Tarsus. Okay, I have 5 BC with a question mark there. With all of these datings, nothing is set in stone. It's all kind of like, all right, if this is true, then this is true, and then if this is true, so we have this range of times. And I'll get into that a little bit. He was a Roman citizen, which was a special dignity. Most likely he came from, I would say, somewhat of an affluent family, because he also studied in Jerusalem under Gamaliel, which was a very famous and very incredibly wise rabbi. So he studied in that school. He was a Pharisee. So if you remember from the Bible, Jesus talks about the Pharisees and the Sadducees. These were 2 groups that would be some of the religious. Pharisees were very strict with the law, and the Sadducees would have this. The distinction I can remember is that Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection, but the Pharisees did at the end of time. And that'll come into play in one of Paul's arguments later. And then he persecuted what was known as the Way. So they weren't really called Christians until a little bit later, but the Way was basically what was perceived as an outgrowth of the Jewish community. So for many of Paul and the Jewish converts, they still had their Jewish roots. And they're like, we're Jewish, but we believe that Jesus is the Messiah. Some of the Jewish community says these guys are not, and then the Romans would be like, who is this crazy people? So that's all going to come into play in just a moment. So you know the story of Paul. He was going to persecute the Way. You know the story of St. Stephen, where St. Stephen, our first deacon martyr, he was stoned to death. And there's a line in there that says, they put their cloaks at the foot of Saul. And that idea that he was participating in this stoning of Stephen because he was probably considered a blasphemer. So now Paul is on the way to Damascus to seek out Christians, these members of the Way, to either arrest them or to bring them back to Jerusalem. So here we go. He encountered the risen Lord on the way to Damascus. This is important because you remember the story. He's going there and he's knocked down to the ground. He has a bright light and he hears a voice that says, Saul, Saul, why have you persecuted me? And he's like, who are you? And he says, I'm Jesus of Nazareth. This encounter in his life had a profound effect in his whole transformation. And we'll come back to it. But it's interesting to note, Jesus didn't say, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting my followers? Paul, why are you so persecuting my disciples? He said, why are you persecuting me? And so this develops in Paul's thinking and his experience that, like, I'll get into that later too. So I'm hoping I'm going to get into all this later. Just pushing it all off. All right. So he was blinded, and then Ananias, who was one of the followers in Damascus, got a dream, and the dream said, bring Paul back to Damascus and pray with him and bring him into the fold, so to speak. So you can imagine Paul is like this murderous, they're fearful of him, and Anna's like, was that really a dream I had, or did I have mushrooms last night? You know what I'm saying? Like, are you serious? Like, this was a very scary thing. But in faith, he stepped out, he brought Paul back. Paul was blinded for a couple of days. They prayed with him, and the story goes he laid hands on him, something like scales came off his eyes, and then he was baptized, and he became a member of the way. And there was like a little training period that he underwent, and people took him under his wing, and he started understanding. It was kind of like a realignment, because he was knowledgeable of all the Hebrew scriptures, and he starts seeing Jesus as the fulfillment of the Messiah. And so it's amazing there, as you see these things. Traditionally, we say they had 3 missionary journeys. If you ever have a Bible, if you go to the back of the Bible, there's a map. Basically, the first missionary journey, he was with Barnabas, whose name is Son of Encouragement. So I like to think Barnabas kind of took Paul under his wing, and let's show you the ropes. And they would go to different cities. That was the first journey. The second journey, Paul goes out with some other people, St. Luke, Paul, another guy named Silas, and a guy named Timothy, and they kind of travel. And when they get to a town called Troas, he goes into Macedonia, and that's where we kind of followed it. I'll show you that a little bit in the map there. So there's 3 missionary journeys, and then eventually he was arrested when he was in Jerusalem. He's arrested many times, but he was put into a jail in Jerusalem, and he claimed his Roman citizenship, so it means he had a right to have a hearing before Caesar in Rome. So they navigated him back to Rome, but that was a whole adventure in itself. And prison back then you had a little bit more freedom to interact with people and things like that. So he wrote letters from prison, and he had people come to help him. So just kind of giving you a little thing there. His final journey was to Rome, and he was killed during the martyrdom and of the reign of Nero. So basically, if we know he was killed under the reign of Nero, and we know Nero was from 63 to 67 AD, we kind of have like a little range of time, but you still have that little range, just to be aware of that. Okay. Sources for the life of Paul. Pretty much everything we know about St. Paul comes from 13 letters that he wrote. You're familiar with those letters: Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, Ephesians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, Philemon, Titus. I think I mentioned some of them. Okay, and then the Acts of the Apostles. So the Acts of the Apostles was Luke's follow-up to his gospel. So Luke is the author of the Acts of the Apostle. And so basically you can find somewhat of a timeline of where Paul went on his missionary journeys. And then ultimately we have some sources for what we call church fathers: Clement or Dionysius, Tertullian, Eusebius. Eusebius was an early church historian. So that's where we would get evidence that Paul was martyred and he was beheaded. That was another perk of being a Roman citizen. You wouldn't get crucified, you could get beheaded. So there's kind of really interesting nuances there, yeah? So, okay. So here's the map. There's a map on your thing here. I'll just kind of show you here. This is Jerusalem here. And then here's Tarsus, where Paul lived. And then this is all modern day Turkey. And so his first journey, he kind of went here, and he kind of came back and came back. That was one. And then here's one. He went up through here, and he kind of came back. Then there was a third journey. Then he went someplace in here. And then there's the fourth journey. So, okay, I'm not trying to be super precise. I'm being a little silly. Okay, so here you see different towns like the Troas, Neapolis, Philippi, the Philippians, Thessalonica, Thessalonians, Corinth, Corinthians, Ephesus, Ephesians, Colossae, the Colossians. So you start hearing these different areas of where he traveled. Okay, and then eventually he went to Rome. He stopped in Crete, and they had some type of shipwreck here, and then he landed on Malta, and then he visited Sicily, and then eventually brought to there. Okay, so that kind of just gives you a little visual of the area. Like I said, we pretty much followed his second journey. So if you go to your Bibles, Acts chapter 16, verse 6 to 10, it talks about this vision that he had in a dream. He said, and there was a Macedonian, which would be like what we would call northern Greece now. And he said, come to Europe. He didn't say come to Macedonia and preach the gospel. And so Paul goes to that city called Neapolis, Christopolis, Kavala. Now, why did I share those three names? Remember I mentioned about the different history? So for example, there was ancient Greek history, then the Roman Empire came over, and then Christianity came in, and then the Ottoman Turks came in. So this same town was changed. Neapolis was the town Paul visited, but when Christianity kind of grew and flourished in the 5th century on, it got changed to Christopolis. And then when the Ottoman Turks came in and took over that area, it became Kavala. So it's still modern day Kavala, but that's the town Paul went to. So this is right here, a mosaic, kind of in the location in Neapolis or Kavala, where Paul stepped onto. So you see this little dream he has of the Macedonians saying, come over. He crosses over from Tralles. Tralles is the ancient city of Troy, you know, the Trojan horse and all that. He comes over and he comes into Neapolis. So here we go. So I think this was Paul's boat right here. He came into slip 4 is what I told. I saw that in an ancient note. Just kidding. So just to give you, this is the harbor in Neapolis. Now where I'm standing for this picture, literally, if I turn around, that's the next picture. So what you're going to see is you see a lot of modern things, and then you see some ancient structures as well. And so you see this combination depending which city you're in. And so this is Neapolis here. And if you go here, this church is where that icon was. What I was told is that when Paul was here, the water was closer to this edge here. So you see how over time the land has increased. So here, as you can see, this was a church. Then it became a mosque with the minaret, and then it became a church again. So now it's currently an Orthodox church. Greek Orthodox is the predominant religion in Greece. Okay. All right, so Paul visits this town, Neapolis, and then he travels to Philippi, and then he'll go on to these different places. What I was told is that the distance of a city is approximately a day's journey. So how far an average person would walk in one day is kind of how they spaced out the cities. So that's kind of interesting fun fact. So what we see here is we go to Acts chapter 16, 11 to 15. There you go. 11 to 15. We hear about his going from Neapolis to Philippi. He meets Lydia. Paul and Silas go into prison. The Philippian jailer is converted. And then the magistrates secretly try to dismiss Paul and Silas. Paul was a Roman citizen. When he came to the city, they were like, who's this rabble-rouser? Let's throw him in the prison. All of a sudden, look, guys, I'm a Roman citizen. They're all like, ugh. Okay, because Philippi was like a suburb for Rome. Many generals or many Roman citizens, when they retired, were given areas to live in Philippi. So let's go check out Philippi. All right. So if you go back, let me just go one thing back, sorry. So I'm going to say also here, there was a road this was where Constantinople is, and it goes all the way across and it hits Philippi, it does hit Thessalonica, and it goes here. That was called the Ignacian Way. And what that was is it basically was a main highway at the time in the Roman Empire. And so basically you would get to a port here, and then you could take a spot here, and then you could take a ride to Rome. So it was kind of like a very popular road. And that went through the city of Philippi. Behold, Philippi. Bunch of rocks. By the third excavation, I was sick of seeing rocks. But this basically, our tour guide said, is that this would be part of the Ignacian Way, part of that road. And it would go right through Philippi. This area here is called the marketplace or the Agora. And often the marketplace, they sold a lot of goods, but what they also really did is they did a lot of, they didn't have newspapers back then next there, so you would make public announcements, or if someone had a message that they wanted to talk to, or even sometimes there was like not necessarily it was a judge, but there was a criminal act going on, and this is what we determined is going to happen. So it was the central place of communication. This is called the Agora. So that's what we see there. Here's the Agora. Now I'm standing on this place called the Bema, which is like the steps where typically an announcement was made. So now you're looking out into this marketplace, okay? Whoops. And you see some ruins of a church here. So let me just kind of explain that briefly to you. So that church that I just mentioned was there. We were standing in there. If you were here in 1850, okay, this is what you would have seen, okay? All of this would have been excavated underground. And in the late 1880s, late 90s, early 1900s, they started excavating. And they started like pulling back and removing things. And you see a variety of stones. But as I told you, that because of the history, is this a church? Is this a Roman? Is this a Greek thing? So they're really doing a lot of archaeological science. So from where I'm standing right here with this picture, I turn to my right, and that's this picture right here. And you start to see some pillars there. So that was like a church from the archaeologists basically had said, like, yeah, this is probably like maybe a 6th or 7th century church, or, they can kind of determine it from their investigation. And what I discovered is that often when there's a Christian church that was built in like the late 500, 600, often it marks a spot that would have some significance. And so this church was built on top of this little cave, which the archaeologists determined was the prison of the time in Philippi. And so hence, Paul was in prison in Philippi. They speculate that could have been the location there. Okay, there's Violet Keith trying to be St. Paul. Doesn't work. And then here's some remnants of pillars that kind of gave a beautiful presentation of the remnants of the marketplace. Very sunny, very hot. And so remember, Paul was a tent maker. And when I think he was a tent maker, I'm thinking like made pop-up tents, like the Boy Scout style. But tent makers would often be woven cloth that would go over, something like this to kind of block out the shade. So that goes a little bit there. So here are just renderings. This would be like a picture of a proposed image of ancient Philippi, which would have been the time of Paul. And then this would have been later during the Byzantine. So you see now there's churches popped up. And remember that those columns I showed you, most likely that would have been that church remnant there. So what happens is when they get these, the archaeologists are amazing, they kind of get these and they kind of speculate, this was here, this was here, this was here, and they start making some renderings to kind of get a little sense of that. Okay, this here was, let me just show you that. This church here, I think it was here, there was like remnants, and then this is the leftover of that. So there's mosaics here. I don't have a picture, but over here it describes St. Paul. So obviously St. Paul didn't put it there, but it was a church commemorating St. Paul. And then maybe about like the 900s, 1100s, I think 1400s, that town kind of just decayed and it kind of fell apart. But bottom line, there's some interesting things there. Okay. I just showed you this here. Are you familiar with this term? Ichthys. It's a Greek word, ichthys, but it's an acronym. And basically each letter has a different Greek word. And the Jesus Christus Theos Urios Soter, which basically means Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. Now the story I heard, and I'm not positive that, like you would take, so at the time, Christianity could have been very dangerous. So one person would write in his foot on the ground something like this. And then another person would write this, and if you would see the fish, it's kind of like your key, okay. You know what I'm saying? Like this idea that somewhat secrecy, but to kind of go there. So that's a little history. That obviously is spray paint, that's not original. Now here's a beautiful mosaic just outside the city of Philippi, and it depicts it's an Orthodox baptistry. It has a little church in there, and so it's beautiful just outside the city along the river. And if you read the Acts of the Apostle, that's where Paul met Lydia. So this beautiful mosaic, this is St. Paul, this is probably Timothy, Silas, and then this is St. Luke, meets Lydia and her companions. And Lydia was described as a dealer in purple cloth. So we could just read over that. But if you understand history from that time, purple cloth would have been more of a luxury. It would be very expensive. So I think she would be like a success. Like she would have probably selling Gucci bags. You know what I'm saying? Like high line, high quality material. And so she was a successful businesswoman. And the scriptures tell us she was a believer in God. So it doesn't mean that she necessarily was Jewish, but she had some type of faith. And when Paul kind of got ousted from the city, and so what happens is Paul would go to a city, meet the synagogue. He would present the gospel and saying that Jesus is the Messiah. And what happens is some might have said, we're on board. Others been like blasphemer, like he was. And so this caused a lot of problems. And it wasn't just like, we disagree with you, Paul. Like, Paul, you're a heretic. We want to kill you. And they run him out of town. So this was a common experience for Paul. And we'll get back to that in just a moment. But in this case, what happens is he goes to the river and he's preaching the gospel and talking to the people there. And he meets Lydia. And it records this beautiful encounter with Lydia. She gets baptized and she basically says, hey, can I use my resources to help promote the gospel? So this is a very important task to meditate upon, because a couple things that I use this as a slide to describe. We can't do things on our own. We need one another, right? And it reminds us that each person has a unique role in the mission of Christ. Other significant thing, especially in our culture today, she was the first person baptized in Europe. And they didn't call it Europe at the time, but that is Europe. So the first person baptized in Christianity was a woman named Lydia. And this woman gave of her resources, gave of her, I had this image, I read it someplace, she would have been a connected businesswoman. So when she's in Philippi, she might say, hey, Paul, let's meet this guy, or make connections that way. There's some other scenes where, in his different missionary journeys, where he kind of gets up and goes to Philippi to kind of get some help. So she's helped him. Philippi becomes like Paul's favorite place. When he's in prison, the letter to the Philippians writes all about how grateful he is for their help. Because when you're in prison at that time, basically what was happening, they didn't get 3 squares and the possibility of a GED. What happened is they were literally in prison and no food, no clothing, nothing. They had to have outside sources to kind of help them. And if you didn't, you died. And that was kind of a way to, okay, we're done with that. Paul had outside support who would give him food, give him clothing, give him funds to do that. So he loved the people of Philippi for that and was grateful for that. So that kind of just gives you a beautiful there. All right. That's the baptistry right there. And then we had an opportunity to celebrate. This was the stream that they kind of like channeled here. And they would do baptisms there if you wanted to get baptized, the family went. But it's super hot. This is like a mini amphitheater. And believe it or not, I tried to give a short homily. Yeah, I know it's a miracle. I know it's a miracle. It didn't really work. But I had compassion on all the people. So again, this is our little altar, and then we had some people, and there were some people over here that are off camera. And then you see here, this is Father Stan and Father Andy and this other priest from Wisconsin, and then myself. And here, just turning around from where we celebrated Mass, we just got to see the beauty. If you can see some of the mountains in the background. Greece is gorgeous. It's just fantastic. Okay. And then, of course, we had to share a meal. So we would have like along, they would come and you would give you like, you have 3 options. You can get a fish, you can get lamb or some type of meat or whatever. So I'll try to show you pictures later of food. I don't want to we haven't had breakfast yet, so I don't want to. All right, moving on. Acts 17, verse 1-9. What we read here is he traveled through Amphipolis, Apollonia, and then arrived at Thessalonica. So if you look at your maps, or we'll see he's preached in the synagogue at the Thessalonica. Some of the Jews were jealous and irate, and also they were looking for Paul to kind of oust him, and so they attacked the house of Jason. We'll get into that in just a second. Okay. So again, what I mentioned here is he went to Neapolis, he went to Philippi, day's journey in between the cities. So then he went to Amphipolis, he went to Apollonia, and then he went to Thessalonica. Thessaloniki is the name they would pronounce it in Greek, and the Thessalonica was the sister of Alexander the Great. And Niki means victory. So this is way back, when they conquered that city, they named it in honor of Alexander the Great's sister, Thessaloniki, and the city of Thessaloniki, which was victorious. I think that's some of the etymology. So, but this was called the Queen of the North. This was one of the most populous cities at the time of Paul. So it was a very hustle bustle, very big place, and he was there. Okay, so just to give you some pictures, here is the Agora in Thessalonica. But if you look carefully, you see there's buildings and you see cars, and we're actually standing on a road looking down. So there was a tension between doing excavations. There was a story she told us that this was all covered over, and the mayor at the time wanted to put like a high-rise building. And then they discovered some archaeological digs, and there was this little resistance, but eventually won over, and they could kind of get some of the descriptions. Here again, you would see some mosaics, kind of powerful, but this would have been the marketplace, the Agora. So that's Thessalonica, and you can see a little amphitheater there as well. Now, going up the street a little bit, there is this is probably one of the largest Orthodox churches in Greece, named Saint Demetrius. He was a 3rd century martyr there, and so that was a place that we followed up. And this is the inside, and you notice in Orthodox churches they don't have statues like we have in the Roman churches. They have these beautiful paintings called icons, and the icons are, you don't just like paint icons. The term you use is you pray icons. So like you meditate on a certain scene or a certain scripture passage, and as you're praying, you kind of then come to your artwork, and then maybe take a little break, and it's really fascinating. Saint Demetrius there, and that was his remains there as the martyr. So it's a big popular tourist spot to go there. This is Thessalonica. This is like the water, obviously. This is a statue to Saint Alexander just Alexander the Great, the conqueror. I think he was a saint. and his sister was what the town was named after. There's a tower there, and there's just some images of spears and shields that are life-size, so it kind of gave you a sense of some of the Roman soldiers and their weapons. So that just, remember here, you see the water here, so let me show you the next picture. So there's there's lower Thessalonica and there's upper Thessalonica. So if you can see here, we're in upper Thessalonica right now, looking down, and you see that water right there? That's right where we were at with the tower. So it just gives you a little contrast. Modern city, but different places there were excavations. We're on the top, and you can see this is kind of like a city wall on the top of Thessalonica, so you see these ancient ruins there. And this right here was called the Avalatadon Monastery. So basically it's an Orthodox group there, but it's a church there. And in the churches you couldn't take pictures, so I can't get a picture inside. But remember I said a church is often on a location that has a spot. This, they said it was probably on the house of Jason. And Jason was basically a friend of Paul and a supporter of Paul. And when they couldn't find Paul, they kind of dragged him out and kind of like beat him up a little bit. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of give a little bit there. Acts 17, 5-9 kind of gives you the depiction. So moving on, he leaves Thessalonica because they were looking for him. And he goes to this town called Berea. Okay? So now in Acts, this is Acts 17, 10-15, sorry, typo. Paul and Silas were sent away by night to Berea. Jews from Thessalonica came to agitate the crowds, sent Paul to Athens. Silas and Timothy remained, and Berea is now called Berea, which is a different name. So if you look for the modern time of Berea, that's where it's at. So just, this is pretty much the only thing you saw in Berea was this location, which kind of talks about that. I mentioned about the Bema, the steps. They excavated these steps from what they would call the Agora. So I don't know if these are the exact steps Paul walked on, but nonetheless, this would be the location, the podium, if you will, for that. Okay. So Paul is shuffled away, and he's now going to Athens. So now we're going to take a time out, and we're going to forget about Paul for a little and put him on the shelf for a second. And what we're going to do now is we're going to go through the center, the heart of Greece. This is not the exact direction we did, but Thessalonica and Berea is up here, and we took a bus about 2 hours to get to this town called Meteora, or the town is actually called Kalamaka, but Meteora is a very interesting place, beautiful. I'll show you some pictures there. Then we went to Delphi, then we went to Athens, and we'll meet up Paul in Athens, okay? Cool. So here is a beautiful rock structure. You see these holes here? What happened is there was a movement within the Orthodox Church where these individuals went in to become hermits. So they kind of isolated themselves from the community, climbed the rocks with ropes, and they would live there, pray there. People would bring them food, and they would bring up there. And that kind of became, if you're familiar with ancient Christianity, like in the 2nd century, there was a movement of the monastic movement in the Desert Fathers, or what they call Egypt. So there's this movement to kind of move away from the hustle bustle of the city to have a deeper experience of God. And that grew over time. And also when the Ottoman Empire invaded, what would happen, you would have communities start living there, and that would kind of protect you from the invasions of the Ottomans with burning books or burning scrolls. So that was kind of also a safeguard. In the 14th century or so, 15th century, they said at the peak of it, there was about 40 monasteries on top of it. So it went from the individual hermits to the monasteries, and then now, today, there's only 5. So we have to visit a couple.
Is there something on that rock over there?
This rock is the only one that you're allowed to climb. So yeah, that's a guy right there.
And then on the other side.
You know, so this was apparently like.
Was there like a path you went, or you threw a rope and good luck, you know?
That's how it would work originally.
Right.
Now the 5 that we visited, this becomes a source of income for these communities where you have tourists coming in, so buses can come right up to it. But there are still areas, and I'll show you some of that where you can see the ropes and stuff. So if you see like here, this is the monastery on top of these mountains here. Here's a close-up of that. So it's very, you think, how do they construct these things? You know, they didn't have cranes to do all this artwork. It's kind of amazing. And then there's, what do you call them, the Three Stooges?
Tres amigos.
Tres Amigos, thank you. That's what I was thinking. So it was a nice picture with that in the background, and it was great. So here is another, you see this monastery, it's a different monastery. You see these cables that go across, they still use those cables to get supplies. If you need big supplies. If you see very carefully, you see there's a little step here, and you're kind of like a little path. So if you wanted to visit, you could walk those steps and do that. Our group, we didn't do that. We went to another convent there. Oh, by the way, this monastery was actually in a James Bond movie, 1982. I forget which the name of it was. I'm not a Roger Moore fan, but like For Your Eyes Only. Yes, yes. So this was used in that video or in that movie. This is the convent we went to, and you see obviously there's a path here. We were able to drive our vehicle, our what you would call it, our van, our bus, and get there. Very strict on clothing. You couldn't wear shorts, or you couldn't have halter tops, or women actually couldn't wear pants. You had to wear. They had a dress thing you put around there. So they were very strict on that. This is our guide giving us a little reflection of what this monastery is used for. I think she said there was 22 sisters or Orthodox sisters that lived there. And so basically, I'm like, this would be a great place to go for a retreat sometime. And they're like, why would you want to go to a retreat here when all these people are coming through? So they do a lot of their praying and their work early in the morning, and then some of the sisters help to facilitate this happening, but they don't let you take pictures of them. So I couldn't like, hey sister. Here's another beautiful little chapel. You couldn't take pictures, and there's some beautiful flowers, just really beautiful. So here, just to kind of show you, this is the city of Kalambaka, as I mentioned, and this is where you see the monastery. So just kind of give you a perspective. This picture is taken from up there, okay? And then when we had lunch, we were here and we took the picture up there. So kind of give you a little perspective there. All right. Here's some icons. Again, beautiful icons kind of showing you the stages of the writing. There's a woman who's actually praying an icon right there. And then here's a beautiful finished icon kind of displaying some of the bags, the ropes that would come up, and fascinating. So, okay. How's everyone doing? Okay, are you overwhelmed? Okay. So now we're going to leave Kalambaka and we're going to drive to Delphi. Have you ever heard the Oracle of Delphi from your ancient history in Greek history? It became a religious center at the time, like 300 BC. It was known for having the Temple of Apollo. And basically you would go there if you had a successful battle or a successful thing, and you would leave some type of tribute there. Or if you were seeking wisdom, you would consult the Oracle of Delphi. I think you've heard that saying, know thyself. I think that's kind of one of the famous phrases that comes from there. So this is where we stayed at our hotel here. So you can just see the beautiful mountain background. And I took some awesome pictures of stars. The skies were awesome. That was my favorite part, to be honest with you. But there's a lot of good stuff. This kind of gives you like a little bit of a city picture here. And then just some of the background of the mountain, just gorgeous. And unfortunately, when you switch it from here, the clarity is crisper in the original than here, but hopefully it captures that a little bit. Okay, beautiful sunsets, beautiful sunrises. This is part of the, this is like what do you call it? A cove of the Aegean Sea. So you're thinking of the big body of water between Italy and Greece. And you kind of like have that little pockets of water. That's like a little sub there. This is an olive grove. So they had olive groves all along here. And you learned you can't eat olives straight off the tree. You gotta they're really hard. You gotta put them in a brine. Different spices are however you want to prepare them. So I didn't learn it the hard way. Just someone told me. So again, this is just like a little restaurant. So you could go to a restaurant and then go into the garden, and then you'd have these beautiful views. This is another. Yeah, exactly. Gas is very, very expensive. I'm going to say like $5 a liter. So like 3 liters makes $3 bucks. $3 was a liter. No, $3 a liter, and you figure 4 liter make a gallon. I'm talking $12. That's big. So this is going Delphi. These would be like, and again, I don't remember. I didn't write it down. This would be like a city that had some type of victory, and they left a tribute at this area. And basically, when you come to Delphi, you kind of walk up this path. And as you walk up this path, you eventually come to the Temple of Apollo. And what happens is along that path, there's a lot of different countries or little different areas, city-states is what you would call them, that have left different tributes. So there is a museum there that shows you some of these different things, and I'll just show you that quickly. But just again, some of the extra. These are the ruins of the Temple of Apollo. I don't know if you can see that picture clearly, but that would be like an artist's rendition of what the Temple of Apollo lived. This would have been the altar here where they would have made a sacrifice, and if they sacrificed some large animal, all the people there would have eaten meat. So it'd be kind of like a big celebration, because that wasn't always a common food. So there's a lot of so we think like the ancient Greeks or the ancient Romans at the time of Paul, we say they were pagans, but what we mean by that, they were very religious people, but they just didn't believe in the Christian God. So like different groups would have different gods for different things, and you've heard of, I can't even remember, Apollo was one, Hermes, Zeus, all these different, there's a rich like history behind all that. And that was kind of their quote unquote faith. But also they would deal with Roman worship. So like at the time of Paul, a lot of the emperors would be considered divine. Okay, so you know that we say Jesus is Lord, and we read that in the books, and it's like, that's pretty cool, Jesus is Lord. But you see, at the time of Paul, Caesar was Lord. So literally to say Jesus is Lord was it like an act of sedition. You're like, no way, Caesar's not Lord, Jesus is Lord. So like you're kind of like, let's go, you know. So that was a very powerful phrase to recognize. So again, the Oracle of Delphi. This is a little amphitheater that looks upon the ruins of the Oracle of Delphi. This is going further up the hill, this is called did you know this? I didn't know this. Stadium. I think you've all heard of a stadium, right? Well, stadia is actually a unit of measurement, approximately 200 meters. Okay? So this is the distance of a stadium, is what I was told. You know, they didn't have this consistent measurement back then, but this is where they would have like a lot of track and field type games, running or relays or different things of that nature. Prior to the Olympics, they called them the Pan-Hellenic Games, and one of the most famous Pan-Hellenic Games was the Olympics, at which in Olympia. But this was not Olympia, this was a different area. Okay. All right, so these are just some artifacts that I told you. This is on top of a column. You see some of these ancient, these are called the dancing ladies. You see this was a bronze statue, and usually you wouldn't find any bronze because if things were falling apart, it would get raided and you'd melt that down. But there was apparently an earthquake that kind of covered this up, so when they were doing excavations to find a bronze statue, it was kind of really amazing. So I took that. You see a sarcophagus there, a tomb, and then just some other details on that relief. Okay, so I'm just kind of really quickly going through this here. So from Delphi, we traveled to Athens. So we went through here, we kind of went through the city here, Delphi, and now we're back in Athens. So we're going to meet up Paul. Now, I'm not well versed in the Greek history, but you've heard of Athens and Sparta, you know, and the different wars. So we're going to go to Athens, and Athens has on top of it its famous Acropolis. On top of the Acropolis, top of the Acropolis, it has the Parthenon, and you'll see there a Pantheon, right? I'm getting confused. Parthenon. So you'll see some pictures there. Okay, so we're going to meet up Paul here. So you go to Acts 17, 18 through 21. Paul arrived in Athens. Remember, he fled from Thessalonica to Berea, and he comes here. He left his community there. He observed that the city was full of idols, you know, like a lot of religious things, right? And he went to the synagogues, he reasoned with the Jews, and in the marketplaces, the agoras, he would speak about Jesus Christ risen from the dead. Okay, so there's going to be a famous scene here that we're going to get to in just a moment. So here, again, some beautiful, this is the this is to the goddess of Nike. I remember that, Nike, the goddess of victory. This is the main structure on top of the Acropolis you see there, and just some other beautiful artwork. Again, so we're talking 400 BC, 350 BC. You know, most of the columns are standing. If you go to the other side, I didn't have a picture. Apparently during the Nazi occupation, that's what actually caused some of the pillars to come down. So even like when you think of the Nazis, they occupied this for a little bit as well. So over the centuries, it would have different, when the Christians came in, they tried to make some, I think at times they might have tried to make some Christian, I think there's things that they tried to make mosques there. So you see again that constant ebb and flow of the different groups coming in and invading. So again, I'm not really well versed in the Greek history, but needless to say, beautiful structures, just some different angles there. Again, you're my buddies. And that was the most stylish type of hat. That was in style there. So we looked really tourist. That's our crew right there. A nice group there. So going on to Acts 17, 22 to 34, Paul visited an area called the Areopagus, which is a hill next to this, and I'll show you a picture of that in just a moment. And there he preached about the gospel. But what happened is there's this, like, right now it's just a stone mound, but it would be like there would have been like areas where perhaps there would be like a judicial group, or there would be things discussing politics of the time. And then you could kind of go down and you would have the Agora, the marketplace of Athens at the time. So Paul is trying to, how do I communicate to these people? And so he recognizes in one of the places, there was a statue I noticed to an unknown God. Let me tell you about the unknown God. So he used that as an opportunity to talk about how Jesus is sent by God. He gave a beautiful exhortation, and you can read the whole speech he gave. And then he talks about how Jesus rose from the dead. And then all of a sudden, like the Greeks were like, Okay, we'll come back again. We'll talk about this another time. Basically giving that idea that, okay, Paul, whatever. They dismiss him. And the reason I share that is because, like, in my mind, I always think Paul's like this famous preacher, and every time he preaches, everyone's believing. But the truth of the matter is Paul preached the gospel often and often was rejected, you know? And so I can't remember the quote off my head. What does it say? Where the message of the cross is a stumbling block to the Jews and something to the Greeks. I can't think of the mind. But basically, it was rejected. It might be the other way around. My mind is all... I'll look it up some other time. Okay, I'm embarrassed. I don't know that. Of that speech he gave, there were 2 converts that came, Dionysius, the Areopagus, and a woman named Damaris. So the scriptures include that effectiveness. So what happens is he builds these small communities, and these communities become the churches of Athens or the churches of Corinth. Not a building, but the community of believers. That's really important to remember. You know, that the church is not a building. The church is the body of Christ coming together. Okay. So here, this is taken from that position here, looking down. This little area is the Areopagus. So now it's just a mound of rocks, but at the time there were structures there, and it could kind of slope down here, and here is the Agora, the marketplace of ancient Athens. Okay. So there, I was going to do a funny joke. Okay. Twinkle your nose twice, now I'm there. So it was taken from up there, coming this way, so we're now standing on the Areopagus. And this is kind of the edge, it's kind of it's a big rock. So like at that point, like what are we really seeing? But if you're trusting what the archaeologist has said and the history shows, this would have been a place of commerce, a place of conversation amongst many of the intellectuals of the time of Athens, the time of Paul, rather. So this is a church. We did celebrate Mass at this cathedral. This is a Roman Catholic cathedral in Athens, and it's called St. Dionysius the Areopagus, which is one of the original converts from the speech he gave at the Areopagus. All right, moving on. So from Athens, we went to Corinth. Corinth was a metropolitan city. It was basically an area where what do you call that? Port town. So like a lot of people coming in and out, lots of commerce, lots of different cultures and nations. And I like to think of like modern day New York City, with all that comes with that. You have a lot of different things, but there's also like a lot of immorality and a lot of pagan worship, and even some of the pagan worship, like there would be prostitutes with the temple. So part of the act of worship was to engage in that. You know, so it's really kind of what we would consider very sexually immoral. So Paul would come in and challenge the people in that area. So very challenging area to be in. Just to give you that as a little background. Side note, if you notice here, Athens, this is the smallest part to get to Greece, so ancient to have to go all the way around was quite dangerous. So even in ancient times, they tried to use this little isthmus here to cross. Well, now they have the Corinth Canal. So literally, it's amazing. It's just a body of water that goes through there. There's actually a picture I saw of a cruise ship that had maybe like 10 feet on either side, being pulled by a tugboat. I'm glad I wasn't on that. Here's another picture there. And then here, if you see, there's no bridge. And then all of a sudden, a bridge comes up from under the water to connect that. So they kind of have timings of when the bridge, you've seen bridges go like this at the shore. This just goes completely underwater and you can go through. And then obviously cars can pass when the bridge is up. So again, just kind of very, very interesting. All right, so going on to Acts 18, 1-17, Paul traveled to Corinth. He met Aquila and Priscilla, fellow tent makers. Reunited with Silas and Timothy from Macedonia. Crispus was the ruler of the synagogue in that area. He believed in the Lord. Paul stayed in Corinth for 18 months, so that's a year and a half. That's a big chunk of time. Gallio was the proconsul of Achaia, which is an area south of this, and he dismissed the claims. See what happens to the Jews, like, this guy's calling it being a rebel rouser, and Gallio's kind of like, I don't want to get involved with this, you know, and ultimately the Jews beat up Sosthenes, who was the ruler of the synagogue, because he became a believer, and Gallio kind of ignored it. He would have been like the Roman government at the time. So again, I'm just summarizing those 17 verses in 5 points. There's a lot there. Again, I'll just go there. So here's modern day Corinth right there. Beautiful, beautiful rocks. So needless to say, you have to go through that. This is towards the end of the trip, and I'm like, I'm tired. I don't want to see anymore. Neither do you. So just in here. That looks like that's Father Stan there. He means business. He's going to be talking to you, Corinth. We had Mass here on this rock, and then we had this is the only place of shade, and then they gave us a little bit of a explanation. And then this is a remaining, if you want to be in detail of this, most columns come in like sections, and the way they place it happen. This is a solid structure, which is really interesting. But that would have been coming from the ancient Greek time. Okay. So Paul can get discouraged at times. So Acts 18:9-10, Jesus says to him in a dream, "Do not be afraid, but go on speaking and do not be silent, for I am with you. And no one will attack you to harm you, for I have many in the city who are my people." So again, I think I like that picture. That this is a little area, a little site that even Paul, this great saint that we look at, had moments of like, this is a little bit too much for me, Lord, are you sure? And the Lord reassured him and encouraged him to continue. He did. All right, moving on to Acts 18. This is another, essentially he had his hair cut, he was under a vow. He was set sail with Priscilla and Aquila to Ephesus. He says, "I will return to you if God wills." And he set sail for, he set sail to Ephesus. Let me give you an example. He set sail to Ephesus in a couple of verses. He stays there for a chunk of time, and then, but the next verses, then he set sails for Caesarea. So like, it's like, but it doesn't give you all the time frame of how long he was at the location. And that's those verses. So to give you a little sense of this too, let me just give you an example. Thessalonians, the first letter of Paul's letter to the Thessalonians. Remember, he was kicked out of Thessalonica. He's starting this little community. Paul and Silas and Timothy stay there. He goes to Athens. He meets up with them in Corinth. And so what happens? He hears this is what's going on with the community. So he writes his first letter to the Thessalonians to that community to kind of encourage them and to finish up what he wanted to do. So like for me, when you know the context of that letter, it starts to pop. So when you read his letter, you start to see how, okay, this is what was going on at that community, in a small little community. And we're talking about a small church. We're talking like, let's say, we were talking about the church of Corinth at the time. I don't have an exact number, but maybe 50. So you're not talking like a humongous church. You're talking small communities that slowly grew. Okay. All right. Oh yeah, that's Paul's ship. They showed me. They told me that. We took that to Ephesus, and I got lucky. I got to stay in his quarters. And then Paul and Silas got to stay there. And so in this component here, we went into a cruise ship. So a lot of different people came here. So it kind of lost the flavor of a pilgrimage, if you will. You know what I'm saying? It's like nice entertainment and nice meals and all that stuff, which was great. But needless, we took that ship and we went through a bunch of islands. We stopped at an island called Mykonos. We went to an area in Turkey called Kusadase, which is where a little bit further in is Ephesus. Then we went to Patmos. Patmos is the island where John wrote the book of Revelation, or what was known as the Apocalypse. Came down to Crete, Heroklian. Then we stopped in Santorini, Saint Irene, Saint Irene was named after. And then we came back to Athens. So I'm going to try to go through that and really fast. Okay, so put your seatbelts on. So this is just Mykonos. It was just a beautiful stop of a beautiful island. I've seen you have some beautiful water there. It was named after the grandson of Apollo. It was formed from the petrichor. I don't know. This is how this is one of the ancient myths of how it was formed. Known for its dry, windy climate and its sandy beaches and its world-famous nightlife, which I got back on the boat before the nightlife began, just in case you were wondering. There are some beautiful windmills there, and then we set sail to Kusadase. Now Kusadase is in Ephesus, and so here's it. We ride to Kusadase, we get on a boat, we get onto a bus, and we're going to go now to this house here. It was an amazing story. Remember on the cross, Jesus says to John the Apostle, he says, "Behold your mother, and mother, behold your son." And from that point on, John the Apostle took Mary under his wing, or into his house. That's a significant passage of scripture, because what it shows is Jesus didn't have brothers or sisters to entrust his mother to. John the Apostle was the one who he entrusted his mother to. And so traditionally it says that Mary kind of stood under the wing, accompanied John. And we have evidence that John was in Patmos and in Ephesus. So, long story short, there was this mystic in the 17th century, Anne Catherine Emmerich, and she wrote from visions she had about this house of the Blessed Mother, and very descriptive of these various areas. And so in about the late 1800s or so, there was, or maybe 1850, I can't remember, but there was two priests and a sister who were archaeologists or had an interest, and they started like looking in these areas, and they excavated a house that was tested to be this first century. And ultimately, when they got inside to see the descriptions, the visions or the writings of this Anne Catherine Emmerich were like spot on. So they attribute this to be the house of the Blessed Mother, think her kitchen was over there, and the microwave was, no. Beautiful sacred spot. We got to go, our tour guide was awesome. We got to wake up really early, but we got there, no one was there. It was beautiful, beautiful. We got to, you can't take pictures in there, so this is a picture of a picture. It's just a little altar there, and then to the side would show like another flat space. So we just walk through there, make a little prayer, and it's, ask their intercession or Blessed Mother Mary, and then you kind of walk in and you walk through. So we had that a little time, nice. Then we go to celebrate Mass at another location. And this space right here was a beautiful church. And then what happens when we came back, like 500 people, super long line. It lost its quietness. It got hustle bustle. The shops, the coffee shops, and the shopping and all that stuff became there. So it was a real blessing. That was one of the highlights of the trip, to just have that quietness. And then I love this. This is getting coffee. I just love the way the light came out, and each of us argued which one it was shining on. Do you know what I'm saying? And it looks like this Moses coming to Father Stan, But then we made a joke. We said maybe it's light reflecting off of Father Andy's forehead. That's brotherly love, okay? So then we're moving on to Acts 19. We hear about this guy Apollos, who was baptized, and he became a very great orator. He was involved in, if you read the letter to the 1 Corinthians, he would reason daily in the hall of Tyrannus, stayed for 2 years. He dealt with a Jewish exorcist, Sceva. Magic books were burned. There was a riot in Ephesus. Demetrius, the local silversmith for the shrines of Artemis, was upset because when Paul would come in to preach in Ephesus, he said, God made with human hands are not gods. Dude, you're stepping on my business. That's what Demetrius is saying. So it created a lot of anger, a lot of issues, where that they got the whole city chanting, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians, great is Artemis of the Ephesians," basically trying to bum rush Paul out. And of course, Paul was not like, okay, I'm going to leave. He's like, I don't want to talk to those guys. And his friends had to hold him back and basically say, leave, and then eventually it kind of got calm, and then he traveled back. He kind of completed his there. So just to show you that's a little background there. So now we're entering the ancient Ephesus, more stones. This is an ancient library called the Celsus Library. We read about it in a lot of different ancient sources, but it was obviously burnt, and this is what's left of it. So we read about it in history, but this is the remains. Here's another pathway that would would go to Ephesus, that would go towards the bay, where Ephesus used to be closer to the edge of the water. And obviously, over time, the land has extended outward. I don't remember. I think this is called Hadrian's Arch, which would have been one of the Roman emperors. This would be one of the pillars as you entered into this street. So again, you're seeing Roman architecture. You're seeing Greek architecture. Even saying, if you recall in your church history, there was a council of Ephesus in 435. It was where Mary was declared Theotokos, which is the Christ bearer, the mother of God. That the Mary's not just the mother of Jesus, but rather she's the mother of God, Theotokos. And so that was pronounced at Ephesus, again showing that connection between Mary and that town. Okay, so that being said, this is the goddess of Artemis right here. So that's what Artemis was the main god of Ephesus. So if you're coming in to kind of preach about a real God, Jesus, that was problematic. Here's a couple of our other pillars here. Does anyone have idea what that is?
Where?
Stations of the Cross. No.
Up right?
Upper right.
That's the restroom.
That's the latrine. And I was trying to find, I don't think they had a men's and a women's room. You know what I'm saying? So this is it. Then you see this little column right here. That's where you would have flowing water to wash your hands. Oh, and by the way, there was a sponge with a stick left there to clean yourself. I'm not using that one. Not to get gross with you, but that was the way it was back then. So, and they made an interesting thing. Christianity, we talk about privacy and we talk about modesty. That was really a Christian virtue that at the time, like when I mentioned you that stadium where there was athletes, they all competed naked. Do you know what I'm saying? So with a proper understanding of modesty, that was kind of changed, I think, over time. So thank God we have stalls. Right? Now, I don't know if this is accurate, but this is what I was told. You can imagine in the cold, it would be very cold to sit down. So what would happen is you would send your servant in there to sit there for a while, and then you'd go in and be warmed up, and that's where they got the name bench warmer. That's what our guy told us. So I don't know if there's a historical accuracy or is that just a funny phrase. All right, here's some more pathways. This is the Agora of Ephesus. This is a stadium, amphitheater. It would say sat 25,000 people. And just to give you the massive size of people. And this is where people were chanting to Paul, Artemis is the god, Artemis is the god. So kind of gives you a little bit interesting there. Now I'm going to go through this. So after this, we went to a Turkish carpet demo. And so they wanted to sell us some beautiful Turkish rugs. So some beautiful rugs here. You've heard of silk? Silk is made from what? The silkworm. That's all I ever know. Well, the silkworm, this is a silkworm cocoons. And basically they put them in hot water, kill what's inside of it. And then after you let them soak, you kind of get like a little bit of a brush. And you draw up. And I don't know if you can see this, but here are the fine strands of silk. What happens is you kind of put them through this, and that becomes the silk. A single strain is very fragile, but together very strong. And then they would dye it with different colors, and then according to a pattern, they would weave these beautiful rugs. So just to kind of show you that, some beautiful rugs there. The colors are vibrant. How much do you think this rug is? Let's ask people this. $10,000 maybe?
No, more than that.
Yeah.
50.
50? All right, well this is made of silk, so it is a really beautiful, a lot of colors. This is the price tag right here, $109,320. A little expensive. Now, when you go to these places though, they want you to barter. So never pay the price that's on there, because that's their starting spot. Do you know what I'm saying? And I don't think you could get it down to 50 grand, but maybe you could walk away with 80 grand. I don't know, depends on how you are. But still, a lot of money. This is the rug I bought. Not that big. No. So I wanted to buy a rug for my brother's house. He's got a runner right there. I'm like, after they presented all this stuff to you and they did this hospitality, if you were interested, they took you into the side room and our guide said you have to barter. And I'm like, I want to try this. So I'm talking with them and I'm thinking about maybe I'll spend about $500, $800 for my brother, blah, blah, blah. Well, long story short, when I started seeing these cool runners that were only 8 to 10 feet, I'm like, so what are we talking? Like, what range are we talking? Like, $3,700. Okay, do you have anything for like $800? So that's what they showed me. So that's probably like 4 foot by 3 foot. It's like a little prayer rug. So I have it in my chapel. But I was able to barter back and forth. That was kind of fun. Like he gave me a number. I'm like, are you serious? I can't pay that because I knew that I would never do that. So we bartered back down. I got it down to 525. So I'm thinking I'm all proud of myself. I walk out and our guard's like, why didn't you tell me? I would have helped you. So as we're walking to check out, he's like, come on, give it to him for $500. Come on, make it an even $500. And just to watch the exchange was amazing. So, a lot of fun. All right. So now from there we went to Patmos. Patmos is in Revelation chapter 1. Talks about how John, your brother and partner in the tribulation and the kingdom and the patient endurance that are in Jesus, was on the island called Patmos on account of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. In other words, he was in Ephesus. He was not capitulating or not going along with the Roman emperor, so they isolated him in Patmos. When that emperor died, he came back to Ephesus, according to the local tradition. And so he wrote this book in this island of Patmos. And he wrote to the 7 local churches: Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea. Not the Philadelphia here, though. There was a Philadelphia in Turkey. These are ancient cities. Okay. Again, you can't take a picture of any of these things. So like here, we climb up this top mountain. That's our ship right there. And if you see right here, that little doorway, into there begins like a little entranceway. It gives little icons explaining it. And then we go into this little cave. And this cave is supposedly the area of where St. John wrote that book. And then you can go out of that and you go a little higher, and there's a little monastery dedicated to St. John the theologian. So again, you can't take pictures in there, but just to kind of give you a little bit. So this little island, beautiful. All right. So from Patmos, we went to Heroklian, which is Crete. That's the capital of Crete. I'm going to go really fast. This is an ancient civilization called Kenosis, King Manos. So you're talking 10th century BC. And some of the architecture and the technology are incredible. You see like some vases here, but they had indoor plumbing and they had terracotta piping system for their sewage. Like that's what we use now in some places. You know, this is 10th century BC, so that technology is amazing. Smart people. Titus chapter 1, Paul's letter to Titus. He says, "This is why I left you in Crete, so that you might put what remained into order and appoint elders in every town as I directed you." So Titus was kind of a protege of Paul, and as Paul stopped, he was in prison at the time, going to Rome, he stopped at Crete and appointed Titus there. So this is the center city of Heroklian. We had a little breakfast, a little a coffee and things of that nature, and that's a little Orthodox church that in there, this church, there's that little relic of apparently the skull of St. Titus. So that's a reliquary there. So that's kind of there. Okay. So then we went to Santorini. Santorini is named after St. Irene. Gorgeous. This is the tradition what you always think of, like Greece, islands, blue and white waters. So that's a little bit St. Rene. Like, this is the Catholic Cathedral. We got to celebrate Mass in an adjacent church there, but very beautiful. We take these vehicles up, like they look like ski ramps, lifts. You could walk up. You could also rent a donkey and you could ride up, but we were smart. And so you see here, like it's a city on a hill, and then we're here on the top. Now we're looking down. That's our ship there. So you got to take a tender to get you there. Then you have to take those ski lifts up, and now you're on the top of the city there. This is an Orthodox church, but I saw this is like the traditional blue and white that just pops. It's so gorgeous. And this is our crew. This is our last Mass that we celebrated on the island before we went back to our ship to go back to Athens and return home. So this is a cool group. It was really beautiful. Well, yeah. So I'll just stop there. Beautiful sunset as we're coming down the. So this is the effect of me talking on the bus. I don't know if I have any pictures. So here are some of my favorite pictures. I don't know if you can see this, but you can see the Milky Way at nighttime. I saw that in Arizona when I lived out there, but you can't see it around here. It's too light. This is Sagittarius right here. And they call part of Sagittarius the teapot. So I don't know. This is kind of like the body of the thing, the little top, the handle, and here is the spout. And that's the smoke going up. So it's called Sagittarius. Over here, you can see these 3 stars here, and kind of going like this. That's known as Scorpio, the scorpion. So Sagittarius is actually a constellation of an archer shooting at the heart of Scorpio. This is another picture of that area. This here is the Big Dipper. Here you see the 2 pointer stars pointing to the North Star, the Little Dipper. If you know this Mizar, this is a double star. You can see it with the. This is all on my phone. So
And these pictures were taken by your phone?
by my phone. Is that amazing? And then this is just a picture of the Big Dipper right here. So that's it. So one of the favorite verses that I have here is Jesus. This is from Galatians 2:20. Paul saying this: I have been crucified with Christ, yet I live no longer I, but Christ lives in me. Insofar as I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who has loved me and has given himself up for me. Now what's really beautiful about that is just the line to focus on Christ living in me. What happens, and he talks about this in his various letters, like through baptism, we have the indwelling of God. Christ lives in us. We become members of the body of Christ. Remember when he said, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Because if we really believe Jesus is in you, and Jesus is in you, and Jesus is in you, and each of us, what does that really say about our relationship to one another? Well, if Jesus is in me and Jesus is in you, we're connected. And so you can think about that, how we develop that idea of the body of Christ. In 1 Corinthians, I think it's chapter 13, Paul describes a body. He says, the ear can't say to the nose, I wish I was a nose, or the eye can't say to the mouth, I wish it was a mouth. I'm using different things. All the parts of the human body need to work together. Think about this. If you didn't have an esophagus, who wants to be an esophagus? But, if you didn't have an esophagus, you have a lot of problems, right? Let's use a goofy one. If you didn't have, like, a big toe, you need a toe to balance. If you've ever lost a toe, I'm being goofy here, but my point is that Paul used that as an image to say, look, he says, so it is with you as members of the body of Christ. We are united by one Spirit, okay? Each of you have a different role in the body of Christ. And your role, it may not be the same person as this role or my role, but together as the body of Christ, we have a common mission to serve Christ. So there's a lot of beautiful, beautiful teachings, but I think that all came from his experience with Christ at that moment in Damascus. Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And as he reflected on that, remember, Paul was a scholar. He was intelligent. He knew what we call the Old Testament scriptures. And all of a sudden, when he got like that insight, comes from grace, like all this stuff starts to fit together. And then, wow, awesome. So that is kind of a thing there. Yeah, I think that's it. Oh, so this is the most important lesson that I took away from my thing. I gave this to a teacher's conference, but this is the thing. Never give up on anyone. If you knew Saul before he was Paul, you'd be like, this guy's one of our enemies. How do we take him out? It's like, we could have a lot of negativity to him. But God's grace has the power to transform. So never, ever give up on anyone. But here's another thing, too. Never, ever, ever give up on yourself. You can't change yourself, I can't change myself, but God's grace, and we cooperate with that, we can be transformed. And that's really some of the essence of what Paul wants to communicate, you know. His life is that living witness. He encountered Christ, and then he used his gifts to serve the body of Christ. And that's what being a Christian is all about. You and I are to encounter the risen Lord, maybe not in the same dramatic way that that Paul did, but we do encounter the Lord. And how do we sustain? We encounter the Word, the Scriptures, one another, different ways. And perhaps you've had moments where you just felt the Lord speaking to you. Ever go to church and like you hear a reading and all of a sudden like, was that like directly to me? I mean, that could be the Spirit working in your heart to say, yeah, I want to communicate that to you. And so each of you have unique roles in the body of Christ, and cultivating that encounter helps us to realize that we have to put all of our energies to serve the Lord, each in our own way, respecting one another's gifts and talents. And not everyone is the same, but each person has a role that God wants to guide. So those are some of my thoughts on there. Okay. Yeah. So that was just a nice quote from Philippians. Rejoice in the Lord always. I say it again, rejoice. Your kindness should be known to all. Remember, that was where the community of Philippi gave him funds to help him while he was in prison. He says this, have no anxiety at all, but in everything, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, make your requests known to God. In other words, I take that as God wants to hear what's going on inside of your life, in your heart, what's going on. A lot of times people have said, oh, God must be so busy. My problems are not important. That's a lie. God is concerned about each and every one of us. Then the peace of God that surpasses all understanding will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is gracious, if there's any excellence and if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Keep on doing what you have learned and received and heard and seen in me. Then the God of peace will be with you. The end. So you can take that map with you. If you on the back of the map, there's also this little, I have this little, it's called Paul's writings. Now, just to be clear, you can talk to some other scholars and they could be debating this. Do you know what I'm saying? But pretty much we would say that Paul's writings, all of his letters most likely were written before the Gospels. Okay? There are some people, what they call it, you might read it, Paul's undisputed letters. There's 7 undisputed letters, which means that there are 7 of those 13 letters that no one doubts are Paul's writings. There's 6 of those letters that would say that, you know, maybe that was Paul, but maybe it was someone from Paul's community a little bit later. And the reason they do that is because in the original language, the Greek is different. Some of the vocabulary might be different. There's different things going on that way. Perhaps like there's a more developed concept. I kind of come from a theory that I still think Paul was pretty influential in all those. But oh, I knew you were going to ask me. Okay, for your homework, young man, look that up. No, I would say First and 2 Corinthians were definitely one. 1 and 2 Thessalonians. I want to say that's 4. Romans, Philemon, and
Timothy?
What about the Philippians?
Philippians, that's it. Those are the 7 that are the undisputed.
Okay.
You know, but here's the thing. Think about this. If I found one of your grandmother's letters, or you found one of your grandmother's letters and you read it, like, what is that? What does she mean when she's talking about Henry? Who's Henry? What's going on? And she's mad at Henry. If you don't know what the other side of it is, you can conjecture and kind of come to some understanding, but you don't have the whole insight. And that's what we've tried to do with Paul's writings. We know that he's addressing a community, but we don't know exactly the particular situation that he may be addressing. So Paul is very easy to wrench out of context, and wrench out of context in a very terrible way. Do you know what I'm saying? That can sound very cruel and misinterpreted, and people will say, oh, Paul said this and blah, blah, blah. And you have to really be cautious of understanding the context of what he's trying to say, what is his purpose behind what he's saying, and then kind of extract from there. So that being said, this little document just has his letters and then where he wrote them for approximate years. You know, there could be some. Paul wrote letters from prison, but he was in prison. You know how many places? He never said, "Hey, I'm writing from the prison of Rome on 27th, 5th Street." Right? He wrote from prison. Well, he was in prison in Rome. He was in prison in Ephesus. He was in prison in Philippi. He was in prison in Caesarea outside of Jerusalem. Like, so then that becomes scholarly. Where do you write from? You know, it was
Johnny
this,
Cash.
you know. So there's a lot of variabilities, but in those variabilities though, I want to make sure that doesn't undercut the what we would call the inspiration of the text. That we believe that these texts are inspired texts and that they do contain messages that are like information that's truth of what God wanted to convey. Sometimes we can get into like, well, if Paul didn't really write that, I'm not going to believe that. Well, I would still say you'll be careful because there's no conclusive thing that Paul says we didn't. In fact, prior to 1800, pretty much everyone believed that all 13 letters were Paul. But what happened is there was some different analysis that came later that says, well, this vocabulary is not found in Paul. But you understand at the time Paul wrote a letter, he penned some letters, but most of the letters were dictated by others. Take this down, blah, 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 blah. Well, you're going to write either word for word what he says or the gist of what he's saying. But then I'm going to ask you to do the same thing, and for another comes, well, your vocabulary might be a little different. You might use a different turn of phrase, right? Because the letter writing wasn't like, okay, take 2 sentences. It was trying to get the essence and the gist of what was being saying. Maybe there would be something specific that was there. So there's a lot of variabilities in there, which to me, honestly, makes it awesome. Like you're really like, it's like a puzzle. And what this trip for me did is really forced me to go deeper with Paul and to have a deeper understanding. You know, like I pretty much in seminary just had like a surface understanding, and we never preach about it because he's the second reading. Sometimes you do, you know. But First Corinthians 13, it's in every wedding, right? Love is patient, love is kind. You know, so we know some of that. So, all right, I'll shut up. Any questions or?
What about the food? Do you have any pictures?
Oh, yeah. What was I thinking?
Yeah, really.
How much time did you have at some of these places? Because, I mean, it sounds like
Exactly.
15 minutes.
Exactly.
Go, get, I mean, how quick is it gonna go?
A little bit more than 15 minutes, but it was packed. So let me give you one day as an example. We wake up at 7 o'clock. We had to be out of the ship at 7:30. So we had to be at this location at 7:15. So we had to get breakfast before that. Then at 7:30, we get onto a tender boat. We get onto a bus that goes about 40 minutes to go to this thing. We had the Mass and all that stuff at the Blessed Mother House. Then after Mass, we had an hour to go shopping and get a coffee, jump back on the Mass, go to Ephesus, have a 2-hour tour, have about 45-minute shopping experience, get back on there, come back to the ship. Get on the ship. We're on the ship for about an hour and a half until it gets to Patmos. We get off at Patmos, and then we go through a bus to get another 20-minute ride to get to where Patmos was. We walk to the top, like about a 20-minute walk. We're up there for an hour tour of half-hour tour of a museum, and then we have a little bit of leisure time to get back to the bus to then take us back to the ship. So we get to the ship back by 7:30, 8 o'clock, so that we can have dinner at 8:30. Oh, and then by tomorrow, we need everyone to be waking up by, are you okay with 6:30?
Oh, no.
So it was very, very intense, to your point. All right, I'm sorry. Here, so these are just different groups. I'll give you an example. There's a famous dish called pasticcio or moussaka. There's pasticcio, like it's kind of like I would call it like lasagna with some cinnamon and the meat and the noodles. Delicious. Moussaka is the eggplant. That's kind of like, it's very delicious. Here are some like stuffed peppers, and we have some pork and some rice, and there's lots of good food. This is my platter right here. So you have potato, a little pork, a little moussaka, some of the meatballs, and then a little bread, and then these salads, just check that out. Like this. Juicy tomatoes, crispy onions, crispy cucumbers, little oregano, and delicious feta cheese. Are you salivating? I mean, I dream about this, and olives. I don't like olives, but I love them. And then then I had to test out the Greek beer, and another beer. And this is a little small group that we stopped. So we would stop at restaurants and you'd have like small tables. That way you got to know people, which was really nice. And you get to know people over a meal. That was one of the restaurants. Oh, and then another beer. So yeah.
What was that?
What was a watermelon?
Just so for the record, all those beers were not at the same location. Okay, so here, check that watermelon out.
Look at that.
So that was on the ship. So they do all this crafty stuff. Isn't that like? Is she checking? Is she looking at you? And this was a. Whoops.
It's down there.
That's a little bull's head right next to the blue cheese. And then here's, I think this looks like Zeus, right next to the pasta station.
Wow.
Hey, you look like Father Stan. The hair.
So I thought, let me take a picture of a menu. So like there's the top one is the moussaka, and then you have the stuffed peppers, and you have some meatballs, and then this is like a eclectic mix
Oh,
of
is this
things.
on the ship though?
No, this is at a restaurant in one of the islands.
Yum.
So you have like, this would probably be like feta cheese, this would be like some type of puree of some chickpea maybe. This is a tomato, I'm not sure what that is. Those are grape leaves.
Oh, so you just go pick a picture. How was
That's
the
what
language?
you
How
do.
was the language thing? Like,
Yeah, a lot of people knew English, which was helpful, and our guys spoke fluent Greek. So
Okay.
Kalimata is like good morning. And we had a list, we had a little Greek lesson, like 5 or 6 words.
and cold beer was one of the phrases, probably.
No, that's when you just like,
Yeah.
so some pasta dishes, a lot of seafood and things like that. These are some of the different fish platters. You can kind of look like the famous calamari you see there. You know, get hungry there. Then all the clam. I think those are oysters. Mussels. This looks like, I would say this looks like a stuffed calamari.
Stuffed squid.
Stuffed squid. There you go. This is I know this is squid. This is called pulpo in Spanish. Very good. And then you have cool fish.
Oh, you got the whole fish.
Yeah. We always check them out to see if there's any coins in it, but.
I don't ever want anything that can look at me as a meat.
That's great.
And these are some of the grilled
Pita
meats.
bread. Is that pita bread?
Yeah, pita bread. Like this would be kind of like what you call it, gyro.
Gyro.
So little these special. We had a special French entree called French fries. Little kebabs of different chicken or pork, and you have different like that's a little more chicken breasts, and then you have a little bit of I don't know if that's a hamburger. Some other. I think that's a different grilled meat too, pork chop. And lastly is salads, as I saw there.
What about the desserts?
Yeah, see, that's what I did take a picture of that. I'm mad at myself for that, because that was the same question yesterday. Oh, where are the desserts? These are like the appetizers. Have you ever gone to the restaurant in Tavani's, or I don't know what it's called now, Yanni's?
No.
No, it's in
It's right
Bethlehem,
on the
off of
hill.
145.
Yeah.
They have this thing called Saganaki, which is this cheese that you put on, and then you pour like a rum on it, and then it like flames up, and then it gets like a nice little crispy coating. That's what we have there. These are all the different appetizers.
Greek yogurt with honey and nuts.
So there. The only picture I have of a dessert was this one here.
Oh, yeah.
So here
I know.
is
The nuts.
chocolate baklava. This is the middle one is the normal baklava, and this is kind of like a shredded wheat baklava. But if I dare say this, and not for the record, like the Lebanese festival, you go here, it's the same thing. I mean, like there's a lot of, not necessarily exactly, but it's similar. Like the baklava here is fantastic, you know. So it's there.
Thank you, it was good.
All right, so there's some food. All right, we'll leave it on that note. All right, there is some extra food if anyone would like to take anything. And thank you for your time.
Very much.
Sure.
When you